Welcome to the Afghaneye YouTube channel. If this is your first visit, make sure to subscribe and press the notification bell so that you won't miss any of our new videos. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another Afghaneye Live. I am your host Sangar Paikar.
I'm ahmed-waleed Kalkar.
Guys, we have been away for a while, but alhamdulillah we are back and we have a lot to discuss. So first of all, ahmed-waleed Kalkar, how have you been doing lately?
Same old. Just been very busy, just like yourself. Wrote an article on our website, so I haven't totally disappeared, just as you haven't, because you wrote an article as well. So none of us have actually fully disappeared, but it's just, we've not really been able to do or dedicate enough time, or we don't have the time rather to dedicate to live streaming. But alhamdulillah ta'ala, we are back. And how have you been, Sangar? How have you been keeping?
I may look very funny on the screen, and that's partially because I've been very busy. First of all, my work requires a lot of effort, and aside from work, I've been trying to prepare my house, my apartment, so that I can move, inshallah, soon to another apartment. And it takes basically most of the time. It requires a lot of energy. But aside from that, the regular old same stuff that we do, and because of that I wasn't really able to do much for the Afghaneye. And I also think that we have been so busy in August and September. We did so many live shows and we had so many guests. We have new contributors, people who write articles for us. All of that required a lot of effort, and I think I was also a little bit exhausted from everything that we've been doing lately. So I also needed to basically get back to my regular daily life, and then so that once we start again doing the live shows, the podcast, the interviews, the articles, we need to have the energy, we need to have the time, and we also need to cooperate with the new guys, people who are going to help us grow Afghaneye, go to the next stage, which is very exciting. And that, I think, sometimes it's good to be away for a while and then come back. BAM! Do you agree?
I agree. I think everyone that's been watching on YouTube so far has been able to realize that I've been out of the game for a while based on how much I just had to readjust my camera. But so we're back, and so guys, if this is your first time coming on to our live stream, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And before we actually get started, I'm going to do a routine announcement. First of all, there's one thing, Sangar. I don't know if I'm hearing you from the same mic that everyone else is hearing you from, but the quality of the audio is very bad.
Really?
Yeah, like it's incredibly fuzzy. I don't know if I'm hearing you from a different mic or anything else, but it may be something worthy of looking over. And for everyone else, if it's your first time here, please subscribe. If it's not your first time here and you've been one of the people that have been messaging us, asking us when we're next going live, or indeed why we're not going live, if you could like the video, because just like, if you like the video, the more people will see it. And just as you found us, others will find us as well. And yes, Sangar, someone else is also saying that the mic is paining their ear, so it's not just me.
See, that's the thing. When you're away for a while, then you start losing. Mm. Now, why is that?
By the way, someone said, Sangar, the picture for the video is great. One of them is a Kalewal Pashtun, and the other one is the Shar Tommy Pashtun.
Okay,
Uh,
guys, is the audio any better?
no, it's not.
Really? No, you maybe you hear the audio.
All right, let me ask, guys. Are you guys hearing Sangar with a fuzzy sort of audio, or are you hearing him clearly? Okay, so there is a fuzzy noise,
Okay,
according to one person.
okay. Uh, guys, I'm sorry. It's something that. Okay.
Okay, so
Just
fuzziness is something
okay.
everyone else is hearing as
We
well.
have consensus that I am being fuzzy. So let me just see if I can do something about the fuzziness. Mm-hmm. Okay. Am I still being fuzzy?
Slightly, yeah.
Still fuzzy? Hello?
Somewhat so. Better, but the
Better?
volume is lower.
Okay. So let me go like this.
خبریه چه مشکلی شده؟
Yes, so I was changing stuff and I was cleaning the mixer. And while I was cleaning the mixer, somehow I managed to touch stuff that I shouldn't be touching. And now the audio is mhm, compressed, gain lower. And now, is it still fuzzy?
والله
Oh my god. And now, still fuzzy?
هغه قصه ده.
Okay, guys, still fuzzy? Okay. Then
Very distant from the camera.
okay. Is it any better? Is my audio any better?
Guys, I am very sorry about this. Um, no, Sangar, your audio is like it's like hearing you from underground or something. It's very far away. But yeah, guys, so like for those of us who are joining new, because I've noticed that we've had more people joining in, we obviously have technical issues. And if you've followed us over the last few months, you know that this is unfortunately something we are working on because we lack sort of a technical sort of team or the sorts of things that the more established podcasts that you may or may not know of, those sorts of amenities that they have. So that is something that we're working on to the extent that right now, nah, I can't hear you. No. So yeah, just bear with us. Give us a couple of minutes whilst we sort this out, and inshallah, once we do, we'll be talking about quite a few things today. So as yeah, I can hear you, and it sounds better. Yeah, but there's fuzziness. I think we should just go ahead with the fuzziness. Yeah, exactly. All right. So, without further ado, there are a couple of things, Sangat. So, okay, okay, no one else can hear you, by the way. Yeah, everyone is saying they can't hear you.
Can you guys hear me now? I think you can hear me now, but you hear some kind of fuzziness. Ah, yes. All
Okay,
right.
so they can hear you. So
Okay.
now, without further ado, let's get into the topic at hand, Sangat, right? So obviously, we're going to get on to the main news of today, or rather of this week, which is the fact that the Afghan Interior Minister, Sirajuddin Haqqani, has mediated alongside with other figures in the Afghan government between Pakistan and the Pakistani Taliban, and we now have a month-long ceasefire. But before we get into that, I think it's just because we've been gone for so long. I think we should just have a brief sort of catch up to the extent that we just cover some of the content that we've put out there whilst we haven't been live streaming. So, what do you think?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so go ahead.
So we had my article exploring the idea and the implementation of inclusivity, basically suggesting that there's a bit of a disparity and a dichotomy between what is the ideal, which is inclusivity, which we all like, no one really objects to it, and how that is actually implemented in Afghanistan, which has been implemented quite a few times, each time worse than the other. And then there was the open letter that you wrote rather brilliantly, I have to add. The response that it got, even from people who usually disagree with us very strongly, but the response that open letter that you wrote to the diaspora, it was brilliantly written. So there's someone in the live chat asking where they can read our articles, which website. It's on our website, afghaneye.org, and you will find all of our articles there. So Sanger, which should we discuss first? Inclusivity or open letters?
Yeah, we also need to discuss a new campaign that has been
Yeah.
launched by one of our friends, Masuda Sultan, someone we interviewed for one of the first articles that I wrote. Um Masuda Sultan is a very prominent Afghan woman, very active in women's rights, all
Head
sorts
of
of.
an NGO.
Yes, very prominent figure who has done a lot for the Afghan women in Afghanistan. And she has recently launched a campaign called Unfreeze Afghanistan. So we will shortly talk about that as well. And I hope to have Masuda as a guest soon on our show. At least we will try, see if we can get her on our show. And obviously, the articles that we published, I would say let's just talk about the inclusivity article first, because that's sort of like an issue that is somehow also related to the TTP in Pakistan situation. So let's go ahead. First of all, Walid, can you, for the people who have read the article, or if they haven't read the article yet, um, could you just briefly summarize what was the general idea behind writing this article?
Okay, so essentially what we have in Afghanistan over the last decades is this acknowledgement in theory that any sort of government should be representative of the social fabric of Afghanistan and all of its diversity as a multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic nation, right? And that has essentially meant, however, the downside of that understanding is that, first of all, there's the lack of understanding that a weak state, a weak central state, cannot find within itself the capacity to manage to represent all of society's interest groups, right? Weak central states, Afghanistan amongst them, generally survive by relying on sort of the largest stakeholders in society and manipulating alliances between them. If you look across Afghan history, especially from the beginning of sort of the state building project, you'll realize that that is essentially what the central state has done. So it hasn't really, even from a logistical purpose, financially, whatever you want to say, there's never really been the capacity to represent all of society. But when we talk about a foreign imposed government in Afghanistan, obviously, in order to sort of furnish its credentials at home and abroad, there's this understanding that, yes, the government needs to be inclusive. Now, what does inclusive mean? Well, first of all, like I said, it ignores the reality that there's a weak central state in Afghanistan. So inclusivity is something that's relative. It's not absolute. And on a relative scale, it's difficult to come by. But more importantly, what does inclusivity mean? Or sort of away from being on paper of a multi-ethnic government, what does it mean in reality? And what we've seen what it means in reality is are people who generally posit themselves as ethnic rather than national leaders, both at home and abroad, so that abroad they can basically say, look, I represent my ethnicity. And as such, that means that I should be given a seat in the government. And through that seat in government, corruption, misgovernance, bad governance, almost tyranny, if you want to say it, is the end result. And that was essentially the understanding of 2001, 2004. And it was that sort of understanding and the practical implications of that understanding that resulted in Taliban 2.0. And the same people, when they were influential in government in the 90s, also led to Taliban 1.0. So essentially, the gist is, if insanity is doing the same thing over and over, repeating itself, what would you call giving these people a third, second, or third shot in government when we know what their track records are? Being from the right ethnicity is simply not enough to be given the responsibility of power, especially if your track record is so bad. That is essentially the best I can sum up the article. Is there anything that you would want to ask or
Yeah,
critique me on?
so okay, but let's just say that okay. So far, I agree with the fact that you say that these people use essentially their ethnicity as a bargaining chip um, to become uh, part of the government or have a bigger share in the government, and that they basically present themselves as representatives of an entire ethnic group, as if that ethnic group is a monolith, and that they all have agreed that so and so should represent us. I think that's generally a problem. We can all agree that that doesn't work. However, uh, we can also turn this around and say, look at the Taliban. Okay, their leadership, they are almost exclusively Pashtun, uh, Sunni, conservative rural Pashtuns, predominantly from the deep south and to some extent from the east. Maidan Wardak is not represented properly, which is a shame. Uh, but how can we criticize minorities or warlords and all these figures who claim to be representatives of minorities for their claim, uh, while we have a government that is clearly not very inclusive? I mean, you said yourself, Afghanistan is multi-ethnic, multicultural, linguist, multi. How do you say multiple languages? So while we know that that's the truth, that's the reality in Afghanistan, we also have to accept the fact that Taliban are not really representative for the entire country. So
So I agree. So here's the thing, right? Even in liberal democracies, the winning party never represents all of society, right? And that there's no party or no individual that can represent the entirety or the totality of any society. That's true for Biden in America. That's true for Boris Johnson in the UK. It's true for the Taliban in Afghanistan as well. But here's the thing, right? We're often told the Taliban are illegitimate. Okay, their government is not legitimate. Why? Because they haven't come to power through the ballot box in a democracy. Fine. Okay, totally fine, totally reasonable way of looking at things. But that rationale is missing when it comes to people like Amrullah Saleh, Ahmed Masood, his uncles Atan and Mohammed Noor. Who decided that these people were the representatives of ethnic minorities? Did they win any elections? Were they unanimously agreed upon as representatives of their ethnicities? And now we move further, right? Here's another thing. A lot of the time we hear from people whose understanding of Afghanistan or regional dynamics is not very mature. The Taliban are Pashtun nationalists. It's a Pashtun movement. Now, if you speak, what's really important for a political party is how it perceives itself. How does it view itself, right? Now, if you look at the Taliban, if you look at all of their public pronouncements, everything, they don't consider themselves to be representatives of Pashtuns.
yeah,
Never,
you know what's funny?
yeah,
Minister of Defense Maulay Mohammad Yaqub, he changed the names of major military garrisons around the country. First, they had all these very Pashtun names, Tandar and
yeah,
Maiwand and this and
Atal,
that, Atal. You know, very Pashtun names of the military garrisons. And he changed
yeah,
them to stuff like Mansuri and, you know, Arabic sounding names.
Faruqi and Omari and
Yeah,
Badri, yeah,
referring to, you know, Islamic ideas, etc. And
immediately on social media, the first response was, "You are erasing our Pashtun identity from the government." Okay,
Exactly.
so the Pashtun nationalists, they argue that the Taliban are not Pashtun enough, and that they are erasing Pashtun identity. And at the same time, the argument from other groups is they are too Pashtun, they're too like.
Exactly. So here's what's very important, and why is it important? Because a group, you can forget a group, a person markets him or herself, based on how they perceive themselves.
Yes.
A group markets itself based on how it perceives itself. Nowhere, from what I have read, and I would like to think that I've read a lot, right? But nowhere at a prominent level have I seen a senior Talib come out and say, we consider ourselves the representatives of the Pashtuns of Afghanistan?
But
Nowhere.
okay, but
why
okay.
is that? But why is that? Why?
Pause. Okay. Just before you go on, okay, they can perceive themselves however they want. They can claim whatever they are, but the fact is that they are predominantly Pashtun, that they are predominantly from the south, that they are predominantly from a particular religious denomination. At the end of the day, that's what matters.
Here's the thing. We're contrasting that with the inclusivity merchants, right? The inclusivity merchants don't claim that they are fighting a national. I mean, they do, but they also claim that they are the champions of minority rights. So if they're the champions of minority rights, what's being implied here is that we're representing ethnic minorities. You see, we're representing ethnic minorities against a group which represents the other ethnicity. But the other group has never claimed to represent Pashtuns. Do you see what I'm saying? So if your line of reasoning is that I represent Uzbeks, Tajiks, etc., against the Pashtuns, who are the Pashtuns? They've synonymized the Pashtuns with the Taliban. But the Taliban have never said, we're here as the Pashtun group. They're here saying, we agree on the broad concept of Afghaniyat and Islamiyat. We're open to all ethnicities. Do you see what I'm saying? And so that's why in my article, I said that the byproduct of rewarding its old heavyweights, its veterans, was the fact that its old heavyweights and veterans were from the tribal belt, the south and the southeast. But what I also said at the conclusion, I was like, the Taliban have a historic opportunity, right? If they are intent on institutionalizing a one-party state, this is their duty, and it's an opportunity to break this wheel of 1980s jihadi families now using ethnicity by diversifying their ranks to people of more diverse provincial and ethnic backgrounds. So I'm not saying that the Taliban are sort of their rank and file aligned specifically with the ethnic makeup of Afghanistan. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, however, is that over time, we've seen that this has begun to diversify. And if they want to rule over Afghanistan as a one-party state, which all of the indications are they do want that, right? Then it's their duty to open up even more. So,
okay, but you are saying that the Taliban should be more inclusive, which I agree. I wouldn't say no, they shouldn't. I totally agree. But how can that be achieved when it's a one-party system created over the course of the last 25 years by a group of senior Taliban who are predominantly from a particular ethnic group, from a particular region? What do you have in mind? How is that going to change? It's not even realistic that somehow we have Maulawi of Qari Fasihuddin Fitrat, who is the chief of army staff in Afghanistan, who is an ethnic Tajik. We have Zabiullah Mujahid, who is their spokesperson, who is an ethnic Tajik from Gardes. And likewise, we have a few other Tajiks. We have a few
Qari Din Mohammed, who's the Minister of the Economy.
Yes.
Abdul Salam Hanafi, Uzbek from thing. But here's the
Okay,
thing.
but still, that those few people, they are they are from a non-Pashtun background, and they are not the traditional leaders of the Taliban. But generally, we can agree that the movement
of
is
course.
still dominated by a particular ethnic group, and they may not have a ethno-nationalist agenda because they are conservative Sunni Muslims, and they are more motivated by their religious beliefs. Fine, but still, how can we ignore the plight of people who say, I don't recognize myself in the leadership of this country? These people predominantly originate from a particular group, and I don't see myself in the leadership of the current government. So, and you can reject the groups like the NRF, etc., and say they are basically falsely claimed to be representatives of minorities. But who else? How? How is this going to change? It's not something that it doesn't appear like this is something that is going to change anytime soon, which is why you see that there are people who fall, or at least they are susceptible to the claims and the arguments of people like Ahmad Masood. It's a major problem, and that, in my opinion, there is no clear-cut solution. There is no practical steps at the moment being taken to change that, and that's why I think, your article, I agree that it has perfectly explained why their claim is not legitimate, but the question still remains: what else? What should we do except telling Taliban, oh, please be more inclusive? I would agree with that call as well, but is it really going to happen? What
I
do you
mean,
say?
based on the last 20 years, I would say there's no reason for it to not happen because they recruited from ethnic minorities. So the track record is there. It's just that the track record needs to be accelerated. Their rank and file are more diverse than they were in 1996. That's not an opinion, that's a fact, right? But the point is that the people that are now in the cabinet are people that were there in 1996. In 1996, there wasn't that much diversity. You and I both know that,
Yes.
right? So if you're rewarding loyalty, service, competence, right? Experience as they see it, of course. This isn't me saying that everyone in the cabinet is loyal, competent, so on and so forth. But if that's what they reward, obviously the cabinet is going to be skewed one way or another. But as time goes on, and the people that are now in, let's say, the lower and the mid ranks start to ascend up the hierarchy, why wouldn't it become more inclusive? The track record of the last 20 years has been a diversification of its ranks. So why would that not translate over, the next coming months and years? Why would not that not translate into more inclusivity at the top, at the highest levels? But here's another thing as well. Inclusivity, if it's achieved, it's not going to be achieved in the next month, year, 5 years, 10 years, right? Because a truly inclusive government requires a strong central state, which also requires a healthy state-society relationship. That hasn't been achieved yet. And a lot of people listening are going to think that's a pretty brutal, blunt truth, but that is what it is. And Rome wasn't built in a day. So whether the Taliban do or don't is a different question. But essentially, I would say it's a duty first and foremost, because it would break this very toxic wheel of history of the 1980s jihadi families. It would be really good for the rest of the country to be rid of them permanently, all ethnicities, all of the ethnic merchants. It would be brilliant to be rid of them. But secondly, and more long-term and more important, is it's important for the future state, if it is a one-party state, to be able to command the reverence, the admiration of its people. And that's something that, you're going to need to pressure them on. I would say that so far there's been a glass ceiling for non-Pashtuns, but amongst Pashtuns, there's also been a glass ceiling. And then amongst Khandaris, there's also a glass ceiling for Deobandi Madrasa graduates, right? So there are glass ceilings all over the place. And like I said, if they are insistent on a one-party state, those glass ceilings slowly need to be eliminated and concurrently. And that is how we come about creating a sort of a more healthy state-society relationship.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. Uh, Even though I agree with most of the stuff you write, I feel like I need to give you some pushback.
No, sure,
Because,
definitely. I mean,
okay,
if we don't get it, then what good is it? Do you
yeah,
know what I mean?
yes, all right, okay. So let's move on to the main subject, and then we will discuss the diaspora later. But before we move on to the main subject, guys, if you're watching or listening right now, do something for me, please. Go to www.unfreezeafghanistan.org. Visit the website, read what it's all about, and if you agree, please sign the petition, because it's a campaign launched by Masouda Sultan, someone we know, very, I would say, someone who is a genuine person who has genuinely done a lot for Afghan women in Afghanistan. And I think, being part of the diaspora and being based in a Western country, I feel like there are very few people who are doing good work in Afghanistan, and they should be supported, and that we should cooperate with one another. And Masouda Sultan has done a lot, and now she has launched this campaign. So I think, it's very important to agree with people from different backgrounds, different political, ideological backgrounds, on what is most pressing issue right now in Afghanistan. And that is that Afghanistan is in an economic crisis. There is food insecurity. People are literally starving. And it looks like the international community, especially under leadership of the United States, arguably the most powerful country in the world, they are sort of they have engineered this crisis in Afghanistan. And we need to use all our effort. Or if you are active on social media, you have a presence, you have a following, use your voice, use your platform to advocate for release of funds so that Afghan economic crisis can be averted. Support charities, support groups that provide aid, urgent aid to Afghanistan. I'm not going to say support this charity or that charity or this aid organization or that organization, because each and every one of us need to decide for ourselves who we want to support. But support just anyone and just do something. Like we need to be active. We need to do something. Here at the Afghaneye, we are very preoccupied with talking about current affairs and discussing political matters, which is also a very important a responsibility that we have taken upon ourselves. But there are actual steps that need to be taken right now, and we have to be more active in actually trying to save lives, trying to improve lives of people in Afghanistan. And for that, you need to be involved in either any of these charities, donate to them, support their cause, share their call to action. And this is why I also think that we should at least go and visit the website unfreezeafghanistan.org, see what it's all about, listen to what Masouda Sultan and all people involved with her in this campaign, what they're advocating for. And if you support that, become active, get involved. I know we have a substantial group of Afghan women, non-Afghan women, who also care about the plight of Afghan women. This is a campaign started by Afghan women, and therefore I believe, this is something that you guys also need to support, and check out the website and let us know what you think. And I hope that we will have Masuda Sultan as a guest soon, and then we can talk elaborately about the campaign and other matters as well. So okay, let's move on to the main subject. So
One more thing, I'm just another call. Can everyone like the video and share it on your socials? By the way, make sure you share it on your socials, because that way everyone else can join in as well. And that is the reminder phase done. Okay, Sangar. So a ceasefire has been announced, a month-long ceasefire between the two gentlemen on our thumbnail, Imran Khan, alternatively referred to as Taliban Khan, and Nurwali Mahsoud. So داسي كواليسم زبدة الجزيرة أغيا ومقالة بدر تولج مشتار طول معلومات بكشيستا بياتيت ديكي ما إشكاركها. So you can scroll through it.
I can't do that now because
Okay, no worries, that's fine.
Yeah.
So in any case, guys, I'm just gonna, and this is just to give credit where it's sort of due in case there's any sort of plagiarism. So I'm just gonna be citing from Al Jazeera English's article here. So the Pakistani government and the armed group Pakistani Taliban, or TTP, have agreed to a month-long ceasefire. Government spokesperson Fawad Chaudhry said the Taliban government in Afghanistan helped facilitate the ceasefire. The government of Pakistan and banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan have agreed on a complete ceasefire, Chaudhry said in a statement on Monday. According to state broadcaster PTV, or Pakistan Television, the minister said the focus of the talks was on state sovereignty, national security, peace, social and economic stability in the areas concerned. In the statement, Pakistani Taliban spokesperson Mohammad Khorasani confirmed the ceasefire beginning the 9th of November, which is today, saying it would remain in place until December the 9th, during which both sides would form a committee to continue talks. Peace talks between the government and the TTP began last month. Chaudhry said the truce could be extended if talks continued to make progress. Pakistani Taliban is a separate organization from Afghan Taliban, who seized power in Kabul in August. So essentially the background to this deal, I'll give it in a very brief sort of thing. So we had we've received the super chat, by the way. I'm going to say thank you very much, Osman. £5 super chat. It is the generous support of people like you that enables us to keep going. And it's not just sort of in the monetary or financial sense, but in the moral sense, knowing that people support us. And he says, why are some Afghans like Paymana Assad fighting so hard against Unfreeze Afghan Money? I don't really want to talk much about Paymana Assad right now on our podcast. I think we have very important things to discuss, of which Paymana Assad is not really part of the agenda. I'm sure Sangar agrees with me. But in any case, I would say everyone is sort of follows, or some people follow their ideological biases, even if it results in mass human suffering. It's nothing new. People that do that, not the first, they definitely won't be the last. Now, I'm going to come back to the topic. So how did we get here, right? So the Pakistani Taliban were formally created, and we're going to go into this in detail, Sangat. I'm going to ask you to really get into the nitty-gritty of it. But the Pakistani Taliban, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, was formed as a sort of a single organization consisting of a number of different umbrella groups in and around Pakistan's tribal areas. In late 2000s, I believe it was in about 2007. In 2014, the Pakistani military essentially went charging into the tribal areas, obliterating the Pakistani Taliban. A lot of the Pakistani Taliban leadership and commanders fled across the Durand Line into Afghanistan, following which Pakistan started to fence the Durand Line. Now, if you know about the Durand Line and you've read our article and you've watched our podcast on it, you'll also know that traditionally, for the vast majority of history, it was an open border. People came and went as they pleased. Pakistan fencing that border was obviously received controversially, not just in Afghanistan, but in Pakistan as well, who by local people who interpreted it as a state forcing a barrier between them. But in any case, that 2014 Operation Zarb-e-Azb, whilst it led to a significant reduction in violence, did not yield sustainable results, because despite this fence, the Pakistani Taliban, under the leadership of Nur-Wali Masood, who is the gentleman in our thumbnail beside Imran Khan, under Nur-Wali Masood, fighting has escalated. And this fighting, judging from the looks of it, is not necessarily coming from across the Durand Line in Afghanistan and sort of cross-border raids, but it's taking place domestically. The Afghan Taliban seized Kabul in August, and since then, there have been reports that 3 rounds of negotiations were held, some in Kabul and some in Khost, featuring who is what is now the Afghan Interior Minister, Sirajuddin Haqqani. And the report I just read to you is of a month-long ceasefire announced to start today and due to end in December on the 9th. Now, we pray that that ceasefire continues and that a sustainable long-term solution is found for the tribal areas in Pakistan. We believe, I'm speaking for Sangar here. If you disagree, please do correct me. But we believe that, I believe rather, that the tribal areas of Pakistan have suffered just like Afghanistan in the last 40 years, and there's long overdue, as the war on terror has finished, to end that painful chapter of our history. So now, Sangar, I'm going to get into the detailed questions of this, right? How did the Pakistani Taliban come about? What was the reason for their founding? Who led them? What were the grievances that fed them? Who, essentially, can you break down in a couple of minutes, who are the Pakistani Taliban?
Okay, so first of all, the Northwestern Frontier Province, as it was called in the past, during the British occupation of the subcontinent, was a predominantly Pashtun region, and it was an area where people who got in some sort of trouble with the British Empire, they would escape and go and hide in those areas, okay? Because the Pashtun tribes living in that region, they would provide shelter to anyone who sought their protection. And people from this region, they were also very prominently active in armed jihad, resistance against British occupation. So that's sort of, that's an important historic aspect of the region that you have to bear in mind when you try to understand the Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban. They hail from a region that has a history of being led by prominent religious leaders like Mullah Pawanda from South Waziristan, who led the resistance against the British, and many other such figures. They hail from that.
Mirza Ali Khan.
Mirza Ali Khan, exactly. So these Taliban fighters who are from the tribal area of Pakistan, they hail from that historical cultural background. That's their identity. That's how they identify themselves as the heirs of that legacy, okay? And when you know that, then you have to also move to basically 20th century, after the creation of the Pakistani state. After the creation of Pakistan, what happened is that Pakistan developed in different regions, okay? So some economic hubs like Karachi, Lahore, etc., they developed and they became very prosperous. And with economic development comes social and cultural changes. People adopt to new cultural values, cultural ideas, cultural standards of how they live, how they behave, how they think. So generally, people who are in a developed urbanized area, they are more liberal, more progressive, and the people who are in rural areas, less developed areas, they tend to be more conservative. This is one of the reasons why the rural Pashtuns in Pakistan are very conservative. Okay, so most Islamic groups, parties in Pakistan have an overrepresentation of Pashtuns. That doesn't mean that all mullahs in Pakistan are all Pashtuns. Obviously,
Indeed, we have very secular Pashtuns in Pakistan.
Exactly. But that's one of the reason why there is some sort of a cultural rift between the urban communities in Pakistan and the rural communities, and this is also the case in a place like Peshawar. Okay, so Peshawar is a more developed urban area, but people around Peshawar in the rural parts, they are very conservative. Then there is another aspect that you also have to bear in mind, and that is that after the creation of Darul Uloom Deoband in northern India during the British occupation, that institution became one of very few institutions that systematized and organized a curriculum for religious education. And because they systematized their religious education, that system was basically copy-pasted thousands of times in different areas, and that's how many other madrasas were created. Now, a lot of people, they have this belief in the conspiracy theory that before CIA involvement in Afghanistan, all these Pashtuns were basically hippies. They were just rolling around and making love in grass and whatnot. And then suddenly the CIA created these booklets and created madrasas, and all of them suddenly became Wahhabis, and now they all want to blow themselves up. That's not the truth. The truth is that those rural communities have traditionally been very conservative. However, with the arrival of modernity, it also means that religious institutions also became more modernized, and they also became more structured, and their curriculum was something that could be replicated in other institutions. So if someone goes through the whole curriculum at Darul Uloom Deoband in India, they became a Maulawi, they become a scholar, they finish all the different books in fiqh and hadith and tafsir, etc. Then if they move back to their own rural community, let's say in Peshawar or in Karachi or in Quetta or somewhere else, and they create their own madrasa, chances are that that madrasa is going to be also Deobandi and is going to be very conservative. So this is how these sprawling madrasas emerged along the tribal area in northeast Pakistan. And this is something that was a process that was developing over decades. Okay, and this is why you have so many people in those areas who are either graduates from madrasas. Why? Because in those rural communities, if people want their children to be educated, the first thing that comes to mind, send them to a madrasa, because we are religious conservatives, so we want our children to be educated in that curriculum.
And it's also a way in which they actually become literate. It's the only method of social mobility
Exactly.
that is available. Yeah.
Exactly. So these are very important factors that you have to bear in mind before you try to understand the Pakistani Taliban or even the Afghan Taliban. Okay. So that's a groundwork that I have to lay before I go into more controversial and
Much
recent
appreciated. No,
sources.
it's a
Yeah.
because in order to understand the group, you need to understand the
Yes.
society from which it emerges.
Yes. So for that reason, now that we know that what has happened here over the last 150 years and how this community, this region has evolved and why there are so many madrasas there, then the next factor is that the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, that was a major trigger factor for many Afghans to move into northeastern Pakistan, settle there. Northwestern Pakistan. We're not going to have, this is Kapiso, no, this is Panjshir again. No, so they all moved there, and those Afghans, their children studied in those madrasas as well. But even
And
before,
a lot of those madrasas were actually set up by Afghan Mujahideen factions.
exactly,
I
yes,
believe there was one in North Waziristan called Manba al-Ulum, set up by none other than Jalaluddin Haqqani, who was also a graduate of the Deobandi seminary in northwestern Pakistan.
yes.
So funny how these things feed each other, you know?
Exactly. Now, so when there is a demand and there is supply, you know, the market does its own magic. So when there was a demand for that kind of education, more people flocked into those madrasas, more graduates emerged out of those madrasas, they created their own madrasas, and that's how you have a very tight-knit community of mullahs in Afghanistan who have either studied there, they are graduates there, or they're settled in those areas and they have their own madrasas. And the students in those madrasas are either from Afghanistan or from Pakistan or a mixture. And that's why during the 1980s, when there was no such entity as the Taliban, all these other parties, they were settled in those parts of Pakistan, and they had their own camps, like Hizb Islami had their own camps, they had their own universities, other parties had similar setups. That's how a lot of Afghans became very deeply involved in those areas, even more so than before the Soviet occupation. And when they had a very close relationship with those madrasas, those scholars, those networks of religious scholars and communities, this played a vital role for Afghanistan in the 1990s. Why? Because during the Civil War, when all these different factions were fighting each other and they were basically dividing Afghanistan into small bits and parts, the Afghan Taliban movement emerged. We have discussed this at length in all other previous shows. I'm not going to discuss that. But the Taliban as a movement emerged, and the Taliban, they started attacking all these other factions in Afghanistan. And during those wars against these factions in different parts of Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban, who were predominantly people from different parts of the country, the south to the east, they lost a lot of their men. Thousands of their men died in war, okay? So when they started losing a lot of people, they called on their network, their communities across the Durand Line, and they said, look, we need to get rid of this crisis in Afghanistan and these different factions. So come, send us your fighters so that we can defeat them. So that's how
I just wanna interject here and add a very quick sort of 2-3 sentences here. I mentioned earlier as well, for those that are listening, that the Durand Line has traditionally been open, porous. People have migrated to and from or moved to and from with ease prior to this fence, and that applies specifically to the Pashtun tribes. Generally, the further south you go, the more open things get. So if you look at the Afghan War of Independence against the British, it wasn't just fought by the Afghan army, it was fought by tribes in Waziristan, North Waziristan, South Waziristan, Wazir Dawar Mahsud, the migrating Khilji tribes. All of these people joined in on Afghanistan's war for independence. Now, what happened afterwards with Amanullah basically saying, thank you, you can now go and mind your own business, is a separate discussion. But the reason that I'm mentioning this is that there's a long history of the tribes on both sides collaborating with each other in war, whether that was against the British Empire. We mentioned Suleiman Layiq's father in the Najib podcast, who also used to traverse the Durand Line and fight British forces, and then eventually got deported to Baghlan, where he couldn't cause trouble. Many such instances, even in the Soviet jihad, millions, okay, maybe not millions, tens of thousands of Pashtuns from the other side once again came to Afghanistan. So just to add a bit more of a context to sort of you mentioning the Afghan Taliban calling upon their networks in Pakistan, this is something as well that has its own historical context and background on which we could write dissertations.
Yes.
But for the time being, what's most important is for everyone to understand that the two sides traversing the line and fighting with each other, sometimes rarely against each other, more so with each other, is something that's very normal. Because there'll obviously be Europeans watching here like, how do people from one side go to the other side to fight so easily? But that is essentially the historical context.
Yes, very important point that you made, because people, when they want to understand why the Pashtun religious community from the northwestern part of Pakistan could so easily cross the border and just enlist within the Taliban movement and fight their war, it was because basically they identified with them as one. Most of them grew up.
It was business as usual.
Exactly. They speak the same language. They wear the same clothes. They have same customs. They studied in the same madrasas. They come from a different, from a similar socio-economic background. This is why they were so predominantly present within the Taliban movement in the 1990s. And after 2001, when the United States invaded Afghanistan and the Taliban government collapsed, all of their leaders, they escaped Afghanistan and they started hiding in different parts of Pakistan. And the people who provided them shelter were, again, the same people from the same background, same ethnicity, same ideological persuasion. And when they moved into those areas and they settled there, the United States demanded from the Americans to do something, to take action against the Afghan Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And obviously the Pakistanis, the Pakistani government has always maintained a very how would you
calculating posture.
Yes, calculating posture is a very politically correct way of expressing it towards these regions. Like, for instance, when Pakistan needed manpower to go and fight in Kashmir, they called upon these tribal conservative Pashtuns to do their bidding in Kashmir, but when there was time of peace, they wouldn't develop the region, they wouldn't build roads there, they wouldn't make any effort to uplift the economic, social, they didn't do much in trying to help those regions. And that's why there was always some, not just a cultural, linguistic tension, but there was also a socio-economic tension between the rest of Pakistan and those areas. And when the Pakistani generals and the military elite and the government under Musharraf who made a deal with the Americans that they said we are going to be part of your war on terror against our own people. This created a backlash in those areas, and most prominently, one of the figures who may played a major role there was Sheikh Mohammed Wazir, who was from North Waziristan, and he was one of the first sort of Taliban leaders from the tribal areas who basically got into a armed conflict with the Pakistani military. Okay, and Sheikh Mohammed Wazir then there were some attempts by the locals, by politicians, parties like Jamiat Ulama Islam and different parties in Pakistan to prevent any sort of armed conflict in Pakistan between these Taliban groups and the Pakistani military. But Sheikh Mohammed Wazir also, at some point after a negotiation, agreed to a ceasefire, and he met Pakistani generals. But the Pakistani military, they sort of backstabbed him, and they provided his coordination to the Americans, and the Americans assassinated him with a cruise missile, and he died, and he became a martyr, and he became an iconic leader, a mythical, almost a mythical figure in those regions. So Sheikh Mohammed Wazir was like the spiritual head of what later became the Pakistani Taliban, and he died in 2004.
So 2004, I think there's actually a story that I've read. It's in a Pashto book where essentially there's another thing to understand here as well, is that Pakistan didn't directly govern the tribal areas or Waziristan. There was a political agent that was stationed there, and he would basically act as the liaison between the government in Islamabad and the local tribal heads. And so in 2000, this sort of mode of governance was something that was inherited from the British and their approach to the tribal areas. So in 2001, the Americans and the Pakistanis, I believe, sort of gave an ultimatum to the tribes of North Waziristan to hand over the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and they were met with a refusal by the locals. And once again, it goes back to the point that you made of the sort of the cultural importance attached to giving refuge to people that flee to those areas. So, and of course, the Taliban that were in North Waziristan, and of course, if the Taliban are listening right now, they're not going to like it because we're all one, of course, but not for the purposes of propaganda, but I think just to go dive deeper into sort of the inner dynamics of the Afghan Taliban, because this, of course, plays a role in the Pakistani Taliban. The southern branch of the leadership eventually fled to the surrounding provinces, Uruzgan, Zabul, and reorganized in Quetta in places like Kuchlakh, in Pshin, in Chaman, in Quetta in South Pakistan, which is why you hear the word Quetta Shura. And the southeastern sort of Taliban fled across the Durand line into North Waziristan to Miran Shah. Now, the southeastern Taliban, who are they generally headed by? Who was head of the operational headquarters southeast of the Taliban, Sangar?
Mawlay Mansour, Jalaluddin Haqqani, basically
Exactly.
the people from Loya Paktia.
Exactly. So they went to Miran Shah. So Sheikh Mohammed Wazir is arrested in a period where there's escalating tensions between locals and the Pakistani army, who were conducting raids in the tribal areas, trying to basically find Al-Qaeda members and some Taliban members to give over to the Americans. Now, I believe it is in 2007 that Baytullah Mahsoud announces the formation of the Taliban. So, and this is a period, obviously, of escalating insurgency in Afghanistan, which is being carried out, which is being fought from the tribal areas. So what happens sort of with Baytullah Masood, and then we go to Hakimullah, and we get the Daesh episode. So walk us through the two Masoods up until 2014.
So what happened after 2004 is that basically the focus of all these Taliban from tribal areas was primarily to be involved in the insurgency in Afghanistan. And as I said, they're ideologically exactly the same as the Afghan Taliban. They have the exact same belief system.
At least at that point.
Yes. And what is most important is a significant historic development in Pakistan, and that is the siege of Lal Masjid. Lal Masjid is a very prominent institution in Islamabad. Two brothers whose name is, one was, I'm very bad at names.
There was also the assassination of Benazir Bhutto.
Yes, so the siege of Lal Masjid played a very important role in the emergence of Tehreek Taliban Pakistan, because Abdulaziz Ghazi, the head of that institution in Lal Masjid, he and his brother, they sort of challenged the Pakistani state by saying that, this is an Islamic country, and in an Islamic country you cannot have prostitution, you cannot have alcohol consumption, you cannot have massage parlors run by Chinese where people go for more than just massage, and all sorts of stuff that are considered haram, illegitimate, un-Islamic. These religious scholars and these institutions with their students, they were very activist, and they were basically rallying in Islamabad women from Jamia Hafsa, from an institution tied to Lal Masjid. They marched, and with these women with the sticks, you can even Google the photos. It's a meme from almost 15 years ago. These women with the sticks and niqabs going around Islamabad, and that was something that basically the very conservative religious beliefs of the rural communities started to pop off in the major cities in Pakistan. And obviously the people along the tribal area, they felt like, okay, these people in the city like Islamabad, they are advocating for something that we also agree with. So when General Musharraf basically sieged Lal Masjid because of all the standoff between Abdulaziz Ghazi, his group, it was a very violent standoff, because then Musharraf ordered his troops to just invade Lal Masjid. They drove with armored vehicles into madrasas. They shot a lot of people. They killed a lot of students. It was seen as a desecration of a religious institution. And that was a triggering factor for creation of Tehreek Taliban Pakistan. Because after the death of Naik Muhammad Wazir, the next most prominent figure who basically tried to claim to be representing those people was Baytullah Masood, who was from South Waziristan. And he declared the Tehreek Taliban Pakistan partially because of what happened in Lal Masjid. Okay? And this explains how the military or the armed insurgency in Pakistan against the state was partially caused because of the Pakistani military's role in war on terror, but also...
Okay, I was just going to ask you about that.
Yes.
I was just going to ask you about that. So,
yes,
a couple of weeks ago, Sirajuddin Haqqani, who's the Minister of Interior of Afghanistan at the moment, held a gathering in Intercontinental Hotel, right, in which we obviously heard, we were sent and we heard the recording, his speech that he gave, in which he basically glorified the suicide bombers, referred to them as martyrs, promised their families compensation, money, so on and so forth, right? Now, we know that a lot of the people doing those suicide attacks were not just Afghans, sort of citizens of Afghanistan. A lot of them were from Waziristan, right? Once again, we're coming back to the point where historically, traditionally, the two sides have always fought with each other with very little care for the border. So, and I asked a few people, and the sense that I got was that there weren't the families of Waziristan so there weren't people from Waziristan present at this gathering, despite the fact I can't confirm that, but that is what I heard. But that is despite the fact that a lot of people from Waziristan took part in the war in Afghanistan against the Americans, against what was called the jihad. Now, given that so many people from Waziristan, as well as the other parts of tribal areas, crossed over into Afghanistan to fight to fight with the Taliban against the Americans. To what extent?
Do you know why there were so many people from tribal areas blowing themselves up in Afghanistan? Do you know why?
Because they were being recruited for that.
But why?
As in, why suicide attacks? Why?
Why?
Because of all of the madrasas that were there.
Yes, but there still the Taliban could use a lot of their own people from different regions to do that, but somehow there were a lot of people from Pakistan from tribal areas doing that. Why?
Potentially, I mean, off the top of my head, if it was a specific decision to recruit the tribal areas for suicide attacks, it would be because they would potentially be less effective on the battlefield due to less familiarity with the terrain and locals.
Exactly. And that's the reason why in all parts of Afghanistan, the Taliban fighters consist of people who are from that area, from that village, locals, from that district. They know everything about their area and they are very effective in insurgency. But a lot of these foreign fighters, they were saying, I want to go and become a martyr. And they said, yes, because you don't speak the language, you don't know the way around. And even if they do speak the language, if they are Pashtuns from the tribal area, you don't know the city of Kabul, you don't know these areas. So you're most effective in doing that.
Yeah, and, basically.
Yeah, and this is why then when they would capture potential suicide bombers and they would appear to be people from that area, then they would say, look, all these Taliban, they are foreign fighters. But in rural parts of Afghanistan, the people who were basically running the whole insurgency, they were all locals.
Mm-hmm.
But
now here's the question I'm going to come back to. To what extent was the fact that Pakistan, on the one hand, was the logistical military base for the US occupation of Afghanistan, to what extent, and once we juxtapose that with the fact that so many people from the tribal areas fought against the US, to what extent was the American war in Afghanistan and Pakistan's role in it a trigger cause for these organizations?
You see, one of the most important figures who basically gave the green stamp for blowing themselves up was Nizamuddin Shamzai, head of a very prominent madrasa in Karachi. He wrote a book that in its preface, the preface was, I believe, written by Abdulaziz bin Baz, the old Mufti of Saudi Arabia. Mufti. Yes. So Nizamuddin Shamzai was a Hanafi Deobandi, but he wrote a very prominent book, and the preface was written by Abdulaziz bin Baz. So Shamzai was a very, very influential figure, and he basically I think he was one of the first guys who said that, you know, blowing yourself up is fine. So, and likewise, there were many other very prominent religious figures from tribal areas, but other parts of Pakistan, who provided the ideological justification for armed resistance against American occupation in Afghanistan. And since they were so influential, obviously, if you are, let's just say, if Nigel Farage is from the UK, from a particular demographic in England, you will most likely see a lot of people from his background also supporting his belief system and his ideas and his values and his belief that, you know, the European Union needs to be dissolved, etc. So that's also why a lot of people from tribal area in Pakistan, but also urban areas in Pakistan, they believe that the military occupation of Afghanistan by the Americans is unjust, and they need to be removed. And that's why they saw that as something that they should participate in. And they all flocked towards Afghanistan to take part in that conflict. However, when they saw that their own country, Pakistan, is playing a major role in being the supply route for military supply route, you know, for the military supplies and etc. of the Americans, they felt like, okay, our country, our Islamic country, is basically part of this whole problem.
Anti-Islamic war.
Yes, and that's why there was growing resentment towards the state. And this growing resentment towards the state materialized into actual armed conflict for the first time under leadership of Sheikh Ahmed-waleed, but later with Baitullah Masood and other major political and social events in Pakistan, like the siege of Lal Masjid. All these matters played a major role in development and creation of Tehreek Taliban Pakistan. Now, when we talk with a lot of Pakistani nationalists, with people who are from Pakistan, they are in a state of denial, and they say, you know, these Pakistani Taliban, they are all agents of Indian intelligence.
Indian, Afghan, Israeli intelligence.
Afghaneye, yes, they're not real Pakistanis and they're this and that. They basically shut their eyes and ears for what has transpired in Pakistan in the last few decades, but more generally the whole historic background of what I just explained here. And if you have that kind of mentality, and if you simply ignore facts, you will not understand why the Tehreek Taliban Pakistan is able to recruit people and take part in armed conflict against their own state. This is an issue that if you want to solve a problem, if you want to come to some sort of resolution with an armed group, you have to accept ground realities, you have to accept facts. Just like in Afghanistan in the last 20 years, people who are part of the Kabul bubble, they lived in a total denial of what is going on in rural Afghanistan and why rural people, not just rural people, but conservative communities in the cities also supported the insurgency. They didn't want to accept the fact that there are people who have beliefs, ideas, and motivation to oppose the state, to oppose the military, to all these factors. They just try to ignore it. And then what is more important is that, like in countries like Pakistan, obviously you have all sorts of media organizations. You have state-run media, you have private media, and then they're divided along the ideological lines. Like some of them are more liberal, others are more conservative. But even in the media, there was a total denial. There was a total denial of why people are motivated to oppose the Pakistani state. And for this reason, I think it's very important right now if there's going to be any kind of if there's going to be a negotiation in Pakistan, they need to come to terms with this reality. And on that note, I'm going to grab a glass of water.
So, guys, for those who are here, please, we haven't got as many likes as I would have liked, and that's the only reason I would assume that is the case. Is you know, you guys are not liking it despite me requesting you to do so. So please like the video and please share it on your socials so that others can find this video as well. And yeah, we're discussing sort of the background of the TTP. So Sangar's explained rather eloquently and in detail sort of the underlying social, tribal context, historical context of the tribal areas of Pakistan with specific regard to Waziristan. And so we could go and talk about this for hours on end because it's basically, I'm sure you'd agree, Sangar, it's essentially a theater of the war in Afghanistan. You can't really divorce it, but I'm sort of going to whiz through the remainder. So essentially what we had was that Baytullah Masood announced the formation of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or the Pakistani Taliban, in 2007. He only lived for another 2 years. I believe he was droned. And then Hakimullah Masood, who was probably the most, I would say, Hakimullah Masood, I would say, was the most dynamic, charismatic leader that the TTP had. It was under sort of Hakimullah Masood that the TTP really started to threaten the state at the same time as you sort of had this weird sort of convergence of the Afghan Taliban versus the Pakistani Taliban. Pakistani Taliban generally had far more disputes amongst themselves, which were mediated by the Afghan Taliban. You had numerous ceasefires, peace agreements signed between the central state and the Pakistani Taliban, brokered by the Afghan Taliban, which repeatedly fell apart. And so Hakimullah Masood also died in 2013, and in a drone strike, naturally. And it's also worth mentioning that Waziristan, north and south, was absolutely obliterated by drone strikes. And another reason for Sangar mentioning denialism as to real grievances, we have another movement, PTM. And whilst the leaders of PTM, we've spoken about it on our live streams, have been opportunistic in manipulating the grievances of the people of Waziristan. They themselves actually were at some point very supportive of the war on terror and the drones that obliterated much of Waziristan. But in any case, Waziristan was absolutely sort of hounded by drones, and though American drones that operated with the full acquiescence of the Pakistani state and the military apparatus. And that is one other reason for enduring suspicion, hostility, disdain of the central state within Waziristan. But as I mentioned, Hakimullah Masood was killed in 2013. In 2014, something momentous happened in the region. Daesh, or ISIS, was formed in Iraq and Syria. Shortly thereafter, they announced the formation of what they called a Khorasan province, which essentially incorporated everything from like Iran to India. So Latif Pedram would be very proud. Unfortunately for him, though, they didn't make Dari, or Farsi rather, because Latif Pedram would be very opposed to the word Dari. They didn't make Farsi their official language. But what happened when Daesh formed its local wing was that the TTP were in disarray. There was infighting going on. They were the subject of a concerted military campaign by the Pakistani state that killed thousands of people. And amongst this infighting, many of the TTP's rank and file, including senior commanders, defected to ISIS, leaving the TTP essentially almost like a rump state, a tiny collection of some commanders that remained that did not join Daesh. However, In 2018, Nurwali Massoud, who once again is from the Massoud tribe of South Waziristan, became the leader of the TTP and has since rather meticulously, and I think even the Pakistani nationalists and his biggest foes could not dispute the fact that he's proven himself to be pretty competent in organizing, or rather reorganizing, the TTP into a fighting force. Now, concurrent with all of these developments are increasing gains made in Afghanistan by the Afghan Taliban. And so this is going to fast forward a lot. But once again, contrary to the understandings of many Pakistani nationalists, the relationship between the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani Taliban have always been complex, to the extent that there were thousands of TTP fighters in Afghanistan actually fighting against the government of Ashraf Ghani and the Americans. So for all intents and purposes, for many TTP fighters, once they crossed the Durand line, they were virtually indistinguishable from Afghan Taliban, from Paktika, from Khost, from Paktia. And those were, of course, the areas, naturally, Sangat, in which they were the most operational. So bearing in mind the shelter given in Afghanistan by the Afghan government as well as the Taliban to the TTP, they were never really formally eliminated. Now, the building of this fence, naturally, may theoretically stop cross-border raids, but a lot of the attacks that we've seen against Pakistani soldiers in the last weeks and months have not been cross-border raids. And this fence is not really useful because you can't garrison a fence that extends about the duration of 1,000 miles of border, right? Because you also have the Indian line of control that you need to garrison. So these are sort of the underlying factors at play over here. And come 15th of August 2021, Kabul falls to the Taliban, or is liberated by the Taliban, depending on which side you lie on. It either falls or it's liberated. But beyond that, the Taliban seize control of all of Afghanistan. And since then, rather quickly, there have been reports. Imran Khan, I believe, in an interview with the TRT journalist, what's his name, Sankar? Ali Mustafa,
Yes.
essentially said that his government had always viewed the war not being a solution for the conflict in the tribal areas. And if you know Imran Khan, he was one of the only mainstream Pakistani politicians opposed to military campaigns in the tribal areas. So Imran Khan essentially told Ali Mustafa, the TRT journalist, that his government was engaged in talks with the Taliban, with the Pakistani Taliban, facilitated by the Afghan Taliban. Now, here's the thing. Which or who in the Afghan Taliban is facilitating these talks? As we mentioned, it is the son of Mawlawi Jalaluddin Haqqani, the man that is referred to as the leader of the Haqqani network and is the interior minister of Afghanistan at the moment, Sirajuddin Haqqani, who has mediated between different TTP factions, who has mediated previously between the TTP and the Pakistani state as well. So Sangar, what does it mean for Afghanistan? Because one of the people I follow is Zakir Jalali, who used to teach at Kabul University, who's now been appointed as an official at the foreign ministry. And he was saying, look,
Gang.
yeah,
Gang.
funnily enough, guys, right? You're following people on Twitter, they follow you back. And then the next day it's, oh, they're appointed the foreign ministry or the interior ministry or so on and so forth. But Zakir Jalali, and I found his rationale to be interesting. Zakir Jalali was saying, look, countries spend years trying to get a certain level of repute, credibility, to act or to be seen seriously enough to be mediators. We've only been in government for 2 months. So this shows our influence, the Afghan government's influence on the regional level, as well as our commitment to a lasting peace. What do you make of that angle, Sankar?
Okay, you see what Zakir Jalali said, it makes a lot of sense, and there is a reason why it makes sense, okay? The Taliban provide something that is needed by our neighboring countries. So the Central Asian republics, okay, they are emerging economies. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, they have a lot of wealth, but they're still not developed countries like Western Europe, but they have those aspirations, okay? And in order to grow, in order to develop, they need stability in the region. And for that reason, they were reluctant or sort of reluctant towards the previous regime in Afghanistan. But suddenly, after the start of the US Taliban peace talks, they basically showed their old cards and they said, you know what? We want to also meet the Taliban leaders. And that was like a shock to a lot of people. Like, why? Like, they're very secular. They've been occupied by the Russians for 70 years. Their last names are even changed. They sound Russian. Culturally, they have been under Russian hegemony for 70 years. Why would they suddenly, after 70 years of communism, suddenly support a very conservative religious armed group in Afghanistan? And the explanation, the reason for that is that it's all about money. They need stability to make money. They need stability to grow. They need security to develop their economy, their trade. And for that purpose, they need a partner in Afghanistan that can provide that. Okay? And this is why those countries, despite their huge ideological differences with the Taliban, they see the Taliban as partners because they think that the Taliban can provide security in Afghanistan, which then benefits their international trade and transit. And the same thing applies to a certain extent for Pakistan, because Pakistan will also benefit from stability in Afghanistan, especially because of the connectivity between Central Asia and Pakistan. And these regional countries, they all see something in the Taliban that other part of the world, they don't see that, okay? So the economy of the United States and Central Europe and Western Europe doesn't depend on Taliban. So they may not feel the necessity to build diplomatic ties with the Taliban. They do not feel like they should have good relations with them, because they simply said they have other priorities. But the regional countries, they do have a vested interest in stability in Afghanistan. And now that the Taliban are in power, this can have many implications for the region. This can result into long-term stability, and if the Taliban are also going to negotiate a ceasefire in Pakistan, which will eliminate one of the most powerful and most effective insurgent groups in Pakistan from posing a threat to the security, it's something that all these countries will benefit from, okay, including Afghanistan.
By the way, of course, the stop and start and the closure of all of these crossings in the Durand line is in part caused by Pakistani apprehension about the TTP security concerns.
Exactly.
So in order, and there's also another aspect here as well. See, the Afghan Taliban, the government right now, are playing. They're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because obviously they don't want to alienate Pakistan. They don't want to upset Pakistan. No one wants to upset their largest neighbor, naturally, of course. And at the same time, they don't want to upset and ostracize the TTP, who are essentially their comrade in arms, right? And handing over, I remember going through Twitter and reading a lot of these sort of nationalist Pakistanis saying, you know, if the Afghan Taliban are really our allies, they'll hand over the TTP. And I was like, what? Like, these guys didn't even hand over bin Laden when America was threatening them. So why the hell would they hand over people that fought and bled with them? Right. And they liked bin Laden much less than the TTP, right? It was just a
Yeah.
matter of principle for them. So, but obviously, they've and handing over the TTP to Pakistan, there is nothing bigger. There is no bigger own goal for the Afghan Taliban than to hand over the TTP to Pakistan. Because first of all, we know the accusation of the Afghan Taliban are Pakistani proxies. Second of all, the Afghan Taliban are also feeling the pressure from Daesh, who would basically say, look, all of you Pakistani Taliban that came to join us, you did the right thing because the Afghan Taliban just sold you out, right? So there are multiple reasons for why the current government wouldn't be able to or wouldn't be willing to hand over TTP to Pakistan, which is why this is the most sensible course of action. And if anything, we've come full circle, Sangal, because if you remember the article on the Durand Line, I said that in 1921, right, Amanullah Khan and the British signed an updated version of their treaty in which the British said, look, if we are going to attack the tribal areas, we'll consult you, right? Almost like, you know, you're still somewhat the protector, okay?
Yes.
And now, 100 years later, in 2021, Sirajuddin Haqqani is almost playing a similar sort of role as mediator. Of course, now the British have left. So I would say that this is positive. I personally said earlier on as well, the war in Pakistan, the insurgency against the Pakistani state, is a result of the war on terror and the calculating posture adopted by the Pakistani state towards the war on terror in Afghanistan. Now that the Americans have gone, now that our region is operating in a post-war on terror paradigm, we're entering a new phase of not just regional politics, but world politics that is not characterized by unipolarity, right? The Americans are not the only superpowers left. Things have changed. Both of our countries have changed. The insurgencies operating therein have changed. And so we can't afford to be fighting yesterday's wars as well. And I think one of the things that Nur Wali is he actually endorsed rather strategically, he endorsed PTM, right? And there is nothing that would damage the PTM's credit. Now, so here's the thing. If you're a nationalist Pakistani, generally what you're
Ow.
PTM and TTP are basically two sides of the same coin, right? PTM is basically the political wing of the TTP, I've even heard. But if you actually listen to the rhetoric on both sides, especially the PTM side, you'll know the absolute mutual disdain between them, right?
Yes.
So Nurwali Massoud endorsing PTM is essentially the biggest way to pull the rug from beneath their feet, because amongst the nationalists, now everyone is going to point to PTM and be like, look, Nurwali Massoud endorsed you. What does that say about you?
Yes.
Right? So this is the thing. And another that Nurwali Massoud has done as well, and he's been more intelligent and calculating, is he's also indicated that he wants the tribal areas of Pakistan to have some sort of level of autonomy. To some extent, he's also used and weaponized ethnicity. So he's much shrewder than the previous sort of leadership of the TTP.
And there is a reason for that. There is a reason for that.
Yeah.
Why? Because, as I explained, there were genuine ideological factors that contributed to the rise of the Pakistani Taliban. But who suffered the most as a consequence of that? Yes, the madrasas in urban areas of Pakistan, religious leaders in urban areas of Pakistan, they all endorsed this general idea of jihadism and fighting against the Americans and opposing the Pakistani state. But who was actually doing most of the fighting, whose houses were destroyed, homes invaded, children killed, women killed by the Pakistani state. Those people along the tribal areas, they suffered. And what did the religious communities in Pakistan in urban areas who supported the Afghan Taliban and supported the general, we are very conservative and we are for jihad and blah, blah, blah. What did they do? They just continued eating their halwa, getting fat, while these people were being bombarded. The Pakistani government, they had a scorched earth strategy where they basically demolished entire towns along the Durand line. So, do you think that it's being just calculated and being shrewd, or it's a consequence of being basically backstabbed by
I
their
would
own?
say, I would say it's listen. They've always Baytullah and Hakimullah were always about seizing the actual state. Okay,
Yes,
seizing the
yes.
state. Nur Wali Massoud, whilst he's saying that the state isn't Islamic enough, he's also indicating at some level of tribal autonomy. Now, a lot of people will be, a lot of nationalists rather, will be like, no, the writ of the state must be implemented. But see, that's a post-war on terror understanding. Okay, previous to the war on terror, this was the status quo. Now, obviously, the downside of that was that, first of all, the tribal areas were basically used as a laboratory for Pakistan's Afghan policy, and number two, the tribal areas were severely economically underdeveloped, right? But tribal autonomy doesn't mean that those two things need to necessarily be part of the package. So I would say if tribal autonomy is what Nur Wali Massoud wants and the Pakistani state finds it reasonable, right, if its concerns about Pashtun nationalism are allayed, I would say, you know what, fair enough. That sounds like a deal. That sounds good for Afghanistan. Now, there was one guy on Twitter, I saw his replies to you saying, mind your own business. We are minding our own business because our interior minister basically mediated this whole thing, and our destinies are very sort of tied with one another. I think the last 40 years has demonstrated that. But yeah, I think all of the issues with Nur Wali Massoud aside, I think the troll with he pulled off with PTM is impressive.
That's something typical for the Pakistani Taliban. They have always done this kind of troll moves. Okay, there's too many stories to discuss, but Lashkar-e-Islam is a group from Khyber district, and their leader Mangalbagh,
Yes.
every time he would have a campaign, his campaigns would have these really funny names. First one was called Daraglam. That was the name of his campaign. And the second one was Biadaraglam. And the third one was called Osbadi Khwakshab.
Yeah. So this is the thing. So Nur Wali Massoud seems to be shrewder, and I think for that reason he's also being taken seriously by the Pakistani state. So that is basically the situation, I guess. I personally view it as something positive, not just for Afghanistan, but also, of course, for Pakistan. And it also indicates that our government actually has, rather than trying to act as a saboteur at a regional level, which is what we've been accustomed to, it's now, able to exercise some level of positive, constructive influence abroad. And now I'll move on to your diaspora article before we wrap this up. But just before I do so, Hindsight is asking, what does that mean in English? So Daragla means I'm coming towards you, like
Yes.
I'm coming to you.
That's when you
Daraglam,
like when your children are being very naughty, and you want to scare them, and you say, Daraglam, I'm coming, I'm coming to get you.
I'm coming to get you. Bia Daraglam means I'm coming to get you once again. Wasbati Khwashsam means you will like me going forward. It's like a threat, like now
Now you're in trouble.
if you didn't like me now and up until now you will like me, is basically the message being given off. But yeah, that is the TTP episode. Now, just before we wrap up, Sengar, you wrote an article, an open letter to the Afghan diaspora, and I'm actually going to go on our website right now, and I'm going to open the article, which was actually translated into German as well. I just forgot to
Wunderbar.
share.
Wunderschön. Vielen Dank.
So essentially, the article's start goes as follows. As Afghanistan undergoes yet another period of uncertainty, it is time for the diaspora to pause, self-reflect, and evaluate their role in their country. So I'm going to read out what I think is the most important series of sentences. So I'm going to read as follows. Quote, as the diaspora, there's a crucial point we should realize above all else. As an educated and multilingual diaspora with access to the internet, we have a much greater capacity to be influential than those in Afghanistan. There is a more sinister side to this reality, however. We have the capacity to be destructive, just as we have the capacity to be constructive. Being constructive, however, requires taking lessons from our recent history. The primary lesson to draw is that trying to impose our own understandings on Afghanistan, which are products of our educational experience overseas, is to head down a slippery slope. Making an ideological and resultantly incorrect rationalization of Afghanistan's problems has not and will not work. What's wrong with ideology? I mean, you explain it in the article, but for everyone watching now who may not have read the article, what is the problem with an ideological perspective on Afghanistan?
First of all, people are ideological. Okay, we also have our ideologies. I have mine, you have yours. However, an ideology is basically an abstract concept which imagines the world in a certain way. Okay? And how you imagine the world and how you want to transform or the world based on how you imagine it can have very detrimental effects. Like, for instance, we were talking about the TTP, okay, or the Afghan Taliban. Now, they are religious conservatives. They're Sunnis, to be more specific, Hanafis, educated through the Deobandi system. Now, if they use the state power to transform society, this will cause conflict because most people will not accept belief systems being shoved down their throat by the state. Okay? Mm-hmm. The same thing applies for the Afghan secularists and communists and liberals and feminists and whatnot. All these ideological groups have a same problem. They have this abstract idea and they have this particular outlook, how they see the world, how they perceive matters, how they understand problems in a society. They see everything through that lens. And when they come to a solution, their solution is based on their ideology. Now, we as a society, as Afghans, okay, we have a handicap, as they say in the Netherlands. We are a pre-modern society that is sort of struggling into entering into modernity. And you have a very small minority of Afghans who are educated by Western standards. And because they come from a very conservative and very pre-modern society, when they get exposure to these new ideas, they become very radical and fanatical. We saw that with Amanullah Khan. Guys, if you haven't checked our Amanullah Khan podcast, please do, because it will explain a lot. Okay. And the same thing happened with the communists. We explained that in the Daoud Khan podcast, in the live stream we did on Dr. Najibullah. People exposed to modern ideas, they feel like, okay, we need to transform society, we need to use the state as an instrument to force our ideas on people. And this will cause conflict in Afghanistan. This has caused a lot of bloodshed. A lot of people are still suffering as a consequence of that. And if we accept this reality, then we have to ask ourselves, what is it really what we are trying to do? What is it? Well, do we just want to transform world to meet our own desires and beliefs and living in this utopia? Everyone is just like me, everyone thinks like me, everybody behaves like me. If we want that, then we will never have stability in Afghanistan. We will never have peace, because that kind of that way of thinking will eventually result into violence.
Okay.
And I what I'm advocating for is we have to ask ourselves a very important question: is what do I really care about? What do I care about? The well-being of people? Do I want people to live in safety and security? Do I want people to develop, grow, and evolve on their own terms, or do I want to do them exactly just how I want them to do everything?
Okay. So now here's the thing, right? Now there's a funny juxtaposition to be made here. You remember my article on inclusivity, right? Now,
Yes.
one could say that in my critique of the narrative pertaining to inclusivity, I've taken a side. One could make that argument, taken a side against the people, let's say, Atam Ahmed Nur Sayaf, Ahmed Masood, Amrullah Saleh, so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to read another paragraph from the article, and you tell me, have I done exactly what you've warned against? So our shortcomings, we need to be aware of our own inherent shortcoming. We are diaspora. We don't live in Afghanistan. This makes all of us liable to being uninformed, or even worse, misinformed. An introspection is needed in which we acknowledge our biases. If we subscribe to an opinion, a political philosophy, or identify with any specific political entity or ethnic group, and only look at Afghanistan's current affairs through that perspective, it means one thing. We would not be helping or serving Afghans. We would merely become party to the conflict. Let us ask ourselves, is that really what we should aspire toward? Is that really what motivates us to become involved in our fatherland? What is the point of being involved in our own country when we who escaped Afghanistan and grew up in safety only involve ourselves to perpetuate the pre-existing problems from which we and our parents fled? That was really nicely written, I have to say. But we would merely become party to the conflict. Based on my article, right, and my articles, am I not guilty of that?
Okay, so
I won't get upset. I won't get upset.
Okay, so I would say that you are basically saying the same thing as I do, but in other terms, because you are saying there's a problem, there is lack of inclusivity. However, inclusivity should not mean being part of any group, or arguing that any group is merely represented by one particular leader, and seeing everything to that scope, because that's not what is actually happening. So your critique, I would say, it's not so much being part of that.
But have I not taken a side against Amrullah Saleh? Have I, by doing that, am I not a party?
Yes. Okay. So here's the thing. I would say you do take side. in an intellectual argument, okay? You do take a side, and what I'm arguing for is not saying, okay, you shouldn't have any difference of opinion. You shouldn't have any criticism of anybody. You should just, hug and peace and everything is fine. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you can disagree with me. I can disagree with you. You can have a totally different view of what needs to be done in Afghanistan, but we should not let's just imagine you are an ethnic Pashtun. You just start spewing all sorts of hatred. All these Tajiks, they came from Tajikistan, they should go back to their country. Like, these Pashtun nationalists, they say stuff like that. Afghanistan is a Pashtun country and only Pashtuns are allowed to rule the country. That kind of nonsense. There are people who actually say stuff like that. Okay?
Yeah, of course.
And if that's what you're arguing, then I would say, yes, you are becoming part of the problem. You are basically perpetuating a conflict, and you shouldn't do that. But if you are going to criticize any party, anyone, and you come with rational and well-articulated, arguments against me, against what I say, then go ahead, do it. Be our guest on our platform. We will provide you a platform. Come here, be our guest. Send us an email, info@afghaneye.org. Hello, my name is this or that. I have a beef with you. You said something I disagree with. I want to come and challenge you. Please come. We don't oppose debate. We don't oppose exchange of ideas. And I think, as part of the diaspora, we've spent, I've lived in total in 18 cities around the world. I've moved for 27 times. And in a few months, inshallah, I will be moving again. That would be the 28th time that I'm moving from one place to another place I've spent so much time of my life with people from different cultures, different religions, different countries. That has enriched me into understanding that, yes, we can have difference of views, we can have difference of opinion, we can totally be opposed to stuff other people's believe in, but at the same time, we can also be very respectful. We can also treat with each other with respect, kindness, and compassion, and say, okay, these are the matters that divide us. You do believe this, you believe that, you believe that. We disagree. These are the matters we disagree on. But there are certain matters we all agree on. Whether you support the Taliban, the NRF, Ashraf Ghani, who God knows what, you all should believe in the one main thing. We do not want people in Afghanistan to starve. We do not want people to live in hunger. We do not want people to be denied education, medical, health care. We do not want that. We want our people to have a decent life, and that doesn't matter who you support, from which ethnic group you are. It doesn't matter. Those things we can all agree on. If we can agree on that,
well, based on the fact that some people don't actually want to unfreeze Afghan assets, it seems that we can't agree with some people even on that. But I'm just going to end it with this following paragraph, which is that we need to elevate the voices of people who truly want peace. We need to avoid aligning with people whose role in politics in Afghanistan is entirely dependent on war and its crises. We need to be aware of what problems such people pose. We must raise awareness internationally about the plight that Afghans face as the winter approaches, poverty rises, and their funds abroad remain frozen. We must identify those groups and entities and those people who built whole organizations ostensibly for lofty ideals, but depended on endless war. Above all, as Afghans, we should strive collectively to hold any government in Kabul accountable based on an Afghan-centric framework, not one imposed from the ideologies of abroad. And that, I think, Sankar, I think that was really beautifully written, even though halfway through reading the article, I was is he talking about me? But you know what? Even if you are talking about me, it's fine. So I'm just going to go to the live chat now. And
First
that is,
question: do you have a girlfriend, Walid? Do you ever had a girlfriend?
did you ever have a girlfriend? That's not really, we're here to discuss politics, TTP, ceasefire. My girlfriend or lack of girlfriends is not really the topic of discussion here. But whichever it is, it's not really important. Bart Khan says, "Assalamu alaikum. Are you guys reading the comments? We are now." Muhammad Omar says, "Please do more podcasts. Inshallah ta'ala, we will. We never plan to stop." Many NATO soldiers have said that Afghans have their own traditional alcoholic drinks. Is it true?
Yes.
I believe it would be. Yeah, it is
Yeah,
true.
they make different types of alcoholic drinks in some parts of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
In Kabul, it is usually referred to as watani.
So, and in the absence of any more questions, I think we're going to wrap it up. Sangar, we spent I'd say about 15-ish minutes with technical problems. So I think after this is done, آخر 15 دقيقة بده فيديو تسخب قتكو أو ونو. So we thank you very much for everyone that joined, that listened, that asked questions. Even if they were about, I think one person asked if you're married or not, Sangar, but once again,
I'm sorry, I'm already taken.
Okay, sure. So that is, all of the questions, including the ones on Sangar being married or me ever having or not having a girlfriend. All of the questions are appreciated. And yeah, inshallah, with regards to the TTP, I hope and I pray that it leads to a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Pakistan.
Yes.
And on that note, Sangar, you know what? I think I'm going to record an outro and we'll put it at the end of every video.
Yes.
But yeah, guys, if this is your first time watching, please subscribe to our channel, like the video. I'm currently watching the like bar, so I'm expecting that to rise at least somewhat. Please like the video, share it with your friends, and share it on your social media. And if you believe in our cause of providing a Afghan-centric framework to criticizing any government in Kabul and to providing a counter narrative to the absolutely shoddy coverage of Afghanistan that we're seeing at the moment, please consider donating to us directly on PayPal or by becoming patrons on our Patreon. And on that note, Sangar, thank you for joining me. I mean,
thank you.
Technically, you're the host.
But soon, inshallah, you will do the hosting.
I'll be doing the hosting as well. And guys, we actually have a podcast planned or a live stream planned for Saturday with someone with much experience in the aid industry. And we'll be talking about the aid industry, aid to Afghanistan, and why, despite trillions of dollars, 20 years, Afghanistan, even before the Americans left, is on the brink of a humanitarian crisis. So make sure you tune in then as well. Muhammad Omar is saying it's 3:51 a.m. in Pakistan. Thank you for staying with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.